people that have sat next to me are in the Hall of Fame, players that I coached, and everybody impacts your life. But, I've always been curious and wanted to learn and wanted to get better because the better I became, the better our players became, and the better the people that coached with me would become.
Welcome to the Honor It All podcast. I'm Honor Garrett, your host, and we're here to honor all that is good in the world. Each podcast, I interview top professionals, entrepreneurs, pro athletes, and coaches around the globe who are making a difference, impacting lives, and creating positive change. Today, we have a special guest, Hall of Fame NBA coach, and a dear family friend to the Garretts, Coach Larry Brown. Brown is the only coach in basketball history to win both an NCAA national championship, which is the Jayhawks, 1988, and an NBA title with the Pistons in 2004. He's also the only coach in NBA history to lead 8 teams, different franchises, to the playoffs. Coach Brown also has won a gold medal in the Olympic Team USA as a player and also won a medal as a coach in the Olympic Team USA. One of the most successful basketball coaches of all time, yet all of his accolades don't even compare to the genuine, kind, and generous human being Larry is. Coach has dedicated his life to the game of basketball and impacting lives and young players, coaches, fans, and families. His heart is bigger than his successes. I'm so excited for Larry to share some of his stories and impart his wisdom. Welcome, Coach. How are you?
I'm good, Honor. Thanks so much. That introduction, my daughter must have written that. So, thank you.
No, well, I wrote it, but I consider myself one of your daughters.
I do as well.
Well, I'll tell you, and I'll tell my audience, I would not even be here today if it hadn't been for you helping me get my first job as a reporter and a producer, which means I wouldn't have even met my husband or be part of the Garrett family at all. And now we're coming up on 30 years of marriage and 4 grown children. So you are a true testament that everything we do in our lives has a profound effect on others. So, I mean, you have done that on and off the court. But what I want to talk about right now is basketball. So
okay.
When did you realize you wanted to be a coach and why?
Well, I love to play sports. I lost my dad when I was young, when I was 7. I had an older brother who kind of was there for me, and he loved athletics. Coaches have impacted. My high school coaches were amazing. At that time, kids played more than one sport. And I was lucky enough to play baseball, basketball, and football. I think I spent too much time doing that stuff and not taking care of some other things I should have. But and I used to read these books. They were written by a famous coach named Claire B, and it was a Chip Hilton series. Mm-hmm. And he was an All-American high school player, played baseball, basketball, football, American Legion baseball in the summer. Then he went on to college, State College, and he had a coach named Rockwell who coached all the sports. And I think he taught American history. So my goal was I wanted to coach in high school, teach American history, have the summers off so I could work at a camp. And took a little crazy path here and there. And, Coach Frank McGuire recruited my mother, and I went to North Carolina. And, when you go to North Carolina and play for Frank McGuire, and then Coach Smith, Dean Smith, took over, you're playing for 2 unbelievable human beings and 2 Hall of Fame coaches, and kind of said, hey, I'd love to follow in their footsteps if I could.
So it's safe to say that McGuire and Dean Smith both had a huge effect on you as a player and a coach?
I think every one of my coaches um, had a huge effect on me. I used to go to summer camp, in high school and junior high with the football coach in Long Beach, Long Island, named Roy Illowit, and he was like a father figure to me. But when you play in college, like I did for those, Coach McGuire and Coach Smith, both became my mentors. When I went away, and like you mentioned, I was lucky enough to play on the '64 Olympic team. When I came back, Coach Smith asked me to come join him. Coach McGuire left to coach the Philadelphia Warriors. Coach Smith took over. And at that time, Honor, you only had three coaches. You had the head coach and two assistants, and freshmen weren't eligible. So I was assistant coach and freshman coach. And Coach Smith allowed me to learn how to coach. I get up early in the morning and draw up a practice plan, and he's late. I was an early riser. He was late. He used to read theology and stay up late. And I'd wait for him to come in. I'd hand him my practice plan, and he'd glance at it and hand it back, and never told me how to coach or what to do. Never came to my practice. But he was always there if I needed help. And that allowed me, I think, to learn, because you don't become good at anything unless you have failures,
Right.
unless people allow you to do that. And I'm sure he scratched his head watching my teams play at times. And I'm sure he would have scratched his head if he realized, what I was trying to do with the players. I'll give you a funny story. Charles Schaffer, who played at Carolina, was a Morehead scholar going to law school, was a GA, and he was helping me coach. So coach came to us and said, you're going to have about 100 young men try out for the freshman team. And we have 5 kids on scholarship. And I know you two guys are real sensitive. You're going to want to keep everybody. But unfortunately, we can't. We got to cut it down to 15 as quick as we can. So I want you to have tryouts, but be aware that we have limited time, and try to get the team down to a workable number real quickly. The next morning, after our first practice, coach came in and met with Charles and I and said, you want the good news or the bad news? And I said, well, I like to hear good news. He said, well, you're probably going to have about 10 or 15 kids come to practice today because of the way you ran them and the drills you put them through. I said, well, what's the bad news? He said, well, the 5 scholarship kids' parents called and they don't want to come back.
Oh, gosh.
So that was how I started.
Well, yes, you learn real fast. And I love that you bring up failures, because I think so many people in life are just afraid to do things because of failure. And I love the, is it a acrostic or an acronym that says failure is just a faithful or fierce attempt in learning. We're all just learning, and you don't get better if you don't make some mistakes. So.
No, I look around. Nobody's successful by yourself. The people around you affect your life. Some good, some bad. But you gotta be true to yourself. But being a coach, I've always been curious. I'm 82. I miss smelling the gym, Honor. I want to share, what I was taught, because I don't think anybody had a better background than I have for the coaches that impacted my life. I mentioned Coach Smith and Coach McGuire, my high school coach, but playing on the Olympic team, I played for Mr. Iba, Henry Iba from Oklahoma State, played for John McClendon, who, coached more historical Black colleges and had more of his disciples coach than anybody. Both are in the Hall of Fame. Alex Hannum, one of my pro coaches, was in the Hall of Fame. People that have sat next to me are in the Hall of Fame. Players that I coached. and everybody impacts your life. But, I've always been curious and wanted to learn and wanted to get better, because the better I became, the better our players became, and the better the people that coached with me would become. And, I hated it if assistants sat next to me and used to go, "Way to go, Larry." I wanted them to share, their ideas so I could be better, and our kids at the end of the day would be better. And that's the way the coaches that mentored me reacted.
I mean, once you're a coach, if it's really your passion and what you think you should be doing, and you're always a coach. You've earned that respect and you put in the hard work, and it's not a lifestyle for the faint of heart.
Family really has to make unbelievable sacrifices for a coach. Well, one, I never went to work. That's something that, I think about all the time, Honor. It was never a problem for me to get up early or stay late. It was a problem for family. And you got to have a family that understands your passion and what you're trying to do, because you don't do it alone. And I was so passionate about what I was doing that, I look back and there are a lot of things if I could have changed, I would have changed. I'm always reminded about when you get in a car, the rear view mirror is real small and the front mirror is, the windshield is huge. So you look behind to try to do better, but you got to look ahead and hope you can have opportunities to do better.
When you were talking about players and how everybody has to do it together, no one does it by themselves. What would you say is one of the most important aspects of a good player? I mean, of a good teammate, besides the fact that they're talented? What other attributes do you look for?
Well, Coach Smith wrote on the board, "Play hard, play smart, play together, have fun." And I asked him, "Would you mind if I wrote it'd be nice if we rebounded and defended?" And I did that. I did that every day. And then when I was a college coach, and even in the pros, one of the things we always look for is character. Talent's a gift of God. Some people are more talented than others. No matter how hard you try, talent's going to be there. But character's a choice. So whenever I was recruiting, a player, or being in the NBA and we're thinking of trading or drafting a player or hiring a coach, to me, character was really important, and the willingness to allow themselves to be part of something more important than themselves. I coached a team sport. So to me, when you coach a team sport, everything's about whatever you do impacts everybody around you. Mm-hmm. So when you're on the court playing, if you do your job, it affects the people around you in a positive way. If you don't, it's going to affect everybody. And if you act poorly off the court and do some silly stuff, which we all done, it impacts everybody in the program, the school, your family. So getting back to what you said, I really, I wanted to coach great players and kids that were athletic, but I wanted to coach people that I thought we could make better, that had this willingness to work hard and that cared so much about their teammates that they didn't do anything that would affect them in a negative way. So I look for athletic kids. I look for kids without long necks, because if you don't have a long neck, chances are you have long arms and you have reach, because guys with, long necks, they could barely put their hands over their ears. I look for guys that were split high, had and long legs and were athletic, because if you're an athlete and quick and make a mistake, you can recover. Some of us that aren't great athletes, you make a mistake, I don't care how diligent you are, and it's over. So I
Yeah.
think those were some of the things I would look for.
So you've won national championship, a gold medal, um, a an NBA title, and I think even the Chuck Daly, is it Chuck Daly Lifetime Achievement Award. You've pretty much won all the things that you can accomplish in basketball. What does that mean to you, and how did each one of them really affect you?
To me, the relationships you build with the coaches you work with and the coaches were fortunate enough to play for. Um, the the opportunity you had to have some of the jobs I've had on, or think about it, how many coaches could go to the University of North Carolina and have an opportunity to coach there, to have chance to coach at UCLA, University of Kansas, SMU like I did, and then all the NBA and ABA opportunities that I had. That stuff doesn't just happen. It was certainly because of my upbringing and then the people around me. Um, people ask me what was your favorite coaching job, and I always worry about that one. But when I look back on it, to be honest, when I coached the freshman team and I was assistant coach in North Carolina,
Wow.
um, it blew me away. When I was 26, after my first year at the University of North Carolina, I got off the Connecticut job, and I went and I turned it down. I didn't think I was ready. The ex-football coach in North Carolina happened to go to Connecticut as the AD, and he watched me coach the freshman team. And Coach Smith said, "You're crazy. You're never going to get another job like that." And I said, "Well, my chances, coach. I'm loving what I'm doing." So, but I think I love playing, but there comes a time in your life you can't play, and to continue to be able to be in the gym, being around the sport I love, um, coaching was a perfect avenue for me. And the people, if you think about it, my first year as a head coach, first 2 years at Kansas, on my staff was Greg Popovich, R.C. Buford, and R.C.'s now
Yes.
president of Spurs.
Mhm.
Billy Bano, who became a coach at UNLV, John Calipari, who's now at Kentucky, Bill Self, who's the coach at Kansas, a kid named John Robick, who became a head coach at Youngstown State and then worked for John at Kentucky. Alvin Gentry, who coached in the NBA for a long, long time and was very successful. Ed Manning. It's amazing throughout my whole life, the people that have sat next to me and the players that allowed me to coach them have gone on to do some wonderful things. Now, there's some players I think about, we talk about not looking back. There's some things I would have liked to change on how I dealt with some players. But for the most part, I did my very best, and feel pretty good about, some of the things those kids and coaches accomplished.
Is there a team that you've had, obviously, at North Carolina, that's so dear to you in college, but is there a professional team that you just had so much fun coaching?
I loved them all, Honor. Some teams did better than others. I took over 9 NBA teams, and only one had a winning record. Um, and and I remember when you're fortunate enough to have one of those 30 jobs or whatever, you want to really cherish that. But I remember bringing my assistants, and I always used to try to bring people to coach with me that I had a relationship with, because loyalty and being around people that you trust, it's really, really vital to be that have that kind of staff now. I was always aware of the people that I hired. Give you an example. I had the Philly job, and Matt Doherty got the North Carolina job, and he fired Phil Ford, Pat Sullivan, and Dave Hanners to bring in his own staff.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a call from Coach Smith, and he said, "I want you to hire Pat Sullivan, Phil Ford, and Dave Hanners." I said, "Coach, it's the beginning of the season. I don't have any job." He said, "You'll find it," and hung up. Um, I eventually hired those guys, and I was so thankful for it. But
That's great.
people that you know sit next to you and are part of your life and part of your family are only going to make you a better coach. So when we went to these losing situations, there were some things that were really obvious to me and why we might have lost. One, maybe the players weren't quite as good as the competition. Maybe the coaching wasn't quite as good. Maybe management had a problem. And I always felt, how you start is how you finish. So when we went in that locker room and had the first three practices, I told these guys, we got to be prepared because after three practices, these players will know whether you can coach or not. And that's going to be important. And they'd all say, "Oh, that's probably the most important thing." I said, "No." And then the second thing is they're going to have to know if they can win with us. And they'll find that out after being around us a little while. And they said, "Oh, yeah, that's probably," I said, "That's important, but that's the most important thing." And then the third thing, I said, if they know we can make them better, they'll make more money. And they all said, "Oh, yeah, that's probably the most important thing." And I said, "No, the most important thing is if they know you care and
Yeah.
they trust you." And that's a really difficult thing to accomplish, especially when you take over a team that hadn't been successful. But if you can do that, and I've failed in some ways sometimes, but if you can do that, you can coach for a long time and players will play as well as they're capable of playing. The results will take care of themselves. Detroit was the only team that had a winning record. And I took over for a coach that had great values. So when I walked in that locker room with my staff, those guys were ready to win.
Wow.
Um, they cared about each other. Um, Individual goals were not priorities for them. They were a defensive minded team, which is, to me, if you're willing to defend every single night, that shows a lot about your character, and you're going to win a lot of games don't have any reason to win. So I jumped into a situation that was built, to win a championship and really to win multiple championships.
Well, just to be a head coach of one NBA team is amazing, but you were a head coach for about a third of them. so, so
Almost.
do you think it's a different game today than it was 30 years ago? And what is one of the biggest lessons, I guess, basketball has taught you?
Well, the game has changed. The players are much more athletic. They specialize sooner, which I don't think is a good thing, Honor, to be honest. The uh, the 3-point shot has changed the game a lot. Um, it's less physical than it was. I was lucky enough to play in the ABA and coach in the ABA, and that gave kids of color an opportunity to play and express themselves. During the time when I graduated, I was drafted by the NBA. And there were very few teams. Nobody was my size. The ABA gave people like me and, you know, kids of color an opportunity to play. A lot of young players wanted to play in the ABA, and it was more wide open. There was more athleticism than you were watching when you watched an NBA game. Um, and the thing that I see now, Um, it's become too much of an individual sport in a lot of ways. The players are amazing. The coaches are amazing. I'm not an analytic guy. Everybody I go around with now when I speak, everybody talks to me about analytics. And I always say, I did analytics when I was 14 years old. And they look at me like, what are you talking about? I said, well, I knew what a good shot was, what a bad shot was. I knew we had to get more rebounds than our opponent. We had to shoot more free throws than our opponent. We had to take care of the ball. We had to get more assists. I said those were analytics that were meaningful for me. The analytics you get now, I value, because the more knowledge you have as a coach, the better your players are served. I remember Vince Cully said, analytics are like a drunk using a lamppost. It's for um, illumination, not support. Um, and and to me, anything you can gather that makes you a better coach makes the players better, and you have that responsibility. But I'd like to see more physicality get back in the game. Um, I think you can't go near some of these stars, and I coached Allen Iverson, I coached David Robinson, David Thompson, extraordinary players. If they were playing today, I think they'd average 50 a game. And that's not taking anything away from the great players now.
So, Coach, what are your thoughts on the NIL?
I love the idea that kids are able to make money now going to college. I don't like the idea that the top player might make more than the 13th, because I was taught, 1 through 13, you treat the same. I was lucky I could send my kids through college, and it wouldn't be a financial burden on me, and they could live like a normal student. I always hoped that every athlete would have that same opportunity. And, NIL has helped that in a lot of cases. But, a lot of kids go out, first thing they do is buy sneakers and jewelry and maybe a car. But, I wish there was some way they could understand that the amount of money they make for NIL, you spread it over a lifetime, it's not that much. So it's really important that you have all the things that are necessary to get by in life. If somebody said to me, I could play for money, I would have done that in a second. And, matter of fact, Honor, I left North Carolina coaching to play in the ABA.
Yeah.
And Coach Smith said, Larry, you'll never get another job. That was another comment he made to me again. And I was making $6,000 coaching at North Carolina and $1,000 for summer, camp. And he thought he overpaid me. And then when I went to the ABA, I went with my good friend Doug Moe, and we went to sign our contract. They wanted Doug. They didn't really care about me, but he wasn't going unless I came. But I would have played for anything they offered me. I couldn't believe they were going to offer me money to play, and they said they were going to give Doug $20,000 for his first year and 22 for his second. And Doug's comment to a guy named Sean Mountain Downey Jr., who's the talk show host, happened to be the president. And Doug said, "Is the money guaranteed?" Because we had heard the league wasn't going to, succeed. And he said, "Yeah, it's guaranteed." Doug said, "Well, will you give me an advance so I know you're sincere?" And he said, "Sure, how much you want?" He said, "I'll take $5,000. And he said, "Yeah, I'll write you a check right now." And then he said, "Well, what are you going to give Harv?" And now, my middle name's Harv. And he looked at me, and he didn't seem so excited, but he said, "Well, I'll give Larry $12,500. And I'm saying, wow, here I am. I'm 8'7" now.
Yeah, you got
And yeah. And Doug said, "Well, what will you give him if he starts?" And he said, "Well, if he makes the starting team, I'll give him $2,500 extra." And I'm sitting there, I'm saying, I'm going to start. Now I'm up to 15. And then he looks at me and he said, Larry, the New Orleans Saints are coming to New Orleans the same year we're going to start. I think we need to get some goodwill around the community. And I know you're a coach. You mind coming early and doing some clinics for the kids? And Doug said, well, what will you pay them? And he said, well, Larry, if you come, right away, I'll give you $8,000. And Doug said, hell, you're gonna make more than I am.
He did. Wow, that's
And
fun.
that was my first experience. But
So I was going to
you know,
ask you that because didn't you? So you were coaching, then you went back to playing, and then you got back into coaching. Is that right?
yeah, after the Olympics, I went back with Coach Smith, coached 2 years. Then the ABA started,
Okay.
and Doug and I, Doug was a teammate at North Carolina with me. He was a senior when I was a sophomore. He played in Italy, when the ABA started, and he came back. And he was my very best friend, took care of me in a lot of ways, and ended up, Honor, we both coached together in the ABA. First in Carolina when it was called the Carolina Cougars, and then we moved to Denver together, and then he got the San Antonio job um, as a head coach.
It's funny. I when I talk to people and I tell people that I've moved 14 times in 30 years of marriage, and they can't believe it. They think it's crazy because you start over everywhere you go. Um, but my numbers might pale in comparison to yours. Have you ever counted up how many places you've lived?
Not really. I got to be reminded how many jobs I've had, um, but it impacts family. Everybody always asks me, what was your favorite place to live? And I always used to say where I had the best players. But that's where you impact family. It's just amazing the adjustment kids have to make, and your wife has to make, and people around you that you've grown to love and establish relationships when you just end up moving. Um, you know, think about me, Honor, my first coaching job as a freshman coach. I worked for Dean Smith. He coached at Carolina 36 years. And now one of his, you know, kids is Larry Brown. Look what he's done, where he's gone. And everybody said, if you had to do it all over again, what we do, I changed some things about handling people. Um, but I wouldn't change what I've done and the way I've done it. I can't. Like you said, you only hope that when you were there, when you were coaching and being around people, you tried to do the very best you could with all the people you were lucky enough to come in contact with.
Well, and people ask us all the time, what's your favorite team? Or it's the one you're currently with.
That's right.
But no, I mean, as long as you meet good people and you're doing what you love, I mean, every place has been amazing. There's things, and you've raised amazing kids, and I believe my kids are doing just great and thriving. And in some ways, moving around has made them very resourceful, very adaptable, very good at embracing change. And so I think in some ways, if they can handle it, you set them up for future success.
Oh no, that's your greatest accomplishment if your kids grow up and help others,
Yeah.
and do the things that they really have a passion for. You know, I hate to tell anybody what they should do, you know, but I think whatever they do, I would hope they'd have a passion for it, and in some ways make other people around them better. Then I think that would be pretty neat.
Well, I'll say, I know that you lost your dad at a young age, but am I correct when I read that your mom lived till she was 106?
105 or six, we're not sure. My grandfather was a baker. He came over from Russia and then went back and brought the family with him. And I had this steerage. One of my cousins sent me it. I think they landed in Holland and then came over, on a boat. And we weren't exactly sure, but it's either 105 or 106. So pretty
Well,
amazing. And
that
my
is
brother,
amazing. And if you have her genes, then you've got a lot more life in you and you have a lot more to do. So what I
uh,
wanted to ask is, do you have anything on the horizon? What are your hopes for the future?
well, I still want to smell the gym. Penny Hardaway let me coach at the University of Memphis with him. I had some back issues, so I had to leave this year. But I just love being on the court with the kids. I've never really enjoyed games, Honor. I like the competition, but I always was scared to death that, when our team stepped out on the court, we might not be prepared for something that might come up. And that was anxiety with me was, it was pretty stressful, but I love practice because, it's about making others better, not only your players, but the coaches that you coach with. And I like teaching. I like fundamentals. The way I see teaching now, it's a lot different than the way I did it. Everything that I did was something I learned from somebody else. I don't consider myself an innovator. There's a lot of coaches out there that really are, but if I see something that somebody does that's really good, the only way I would ever put it in our program is if I could teach it better. I remember, you having a football background. I went to hear Bear Bryant speak, and when he was allowed to coach kids of color at Alabama, he had to change the way he coached. Um, and he put in the wishbone, and he said he didn't put it in until he felt he could coach it as good or better than the person who invented it.
Oh, wow.
And that's the way I've always looked at things. I go speak at a clinic and everybody wants you to give them a drill or give them a play, a 3-point play, an out of bounds play. And I said, no, you got to, teach the things they're comfortable teaching because you can't fool the kids, and don't be intimidated by a coach that comes here and tells you all the things that he's done. Go out and make sure that you're comfortable in teaching the things that your kids can execute. And you find out what your kids are capable of doing and then gear it to teach that way to their strengths. And the things that they're not good at, make them realize the things they're not good at, you got to work harder.
Well,
Um,
that's the great thing about self-awareness is if you know what your strengths are and you can surround yourself with people who are good at the things you're not good at, that's when you can really work as a team, right?
yeah, well, they should make that as a biography, as a highlight for me. I don't think Larry Brown would have done squat if he didn't have all these great players and coaches around him. And I think that's probably true in a lot of ways. Every day, Honor, I went to practice. When I was a player, the people around me challenged me and made me better. And whatever level I played on, every day I went to practice. We were prepared because we all met. I wanted to walk in a room. I didn't want to tell, my assistants what they should do. I wanted them to tell me what we needed to do. I wanted to empower them because by doing that, they empowered me and made me better. And then at games and in practice, I wanted their input. If I was at practice and we were scrimmaging, running up and down the court, I wanted the kids to hear one voice. But when we were doing drills or it was a quiet moment, I wanted them to hear multiple voices so they knew I respected the people that were working with me and I valued them. Mm. And at games, I wanted my assistants. I don't get the coaches now, if you watch college and pro, the coaches are standing up, running up and down the court. And I wanted to sit next to my coaches and close to the players and have my coaches share their ideas as the game was going on. It didn't mean I did everything they told me to do, but it made me better. And I valued everything they said to me. And the kids knew that I valued the assistant coaches as much as I valued them. And I think it was really helpful and important.
Well, that right there is what made you and makes you such an incredible leader. I mean, gosh, I think any team, even now, would be lucky to have someone like you at their side and helping them win and continue to win more championships.
Well, I think the NCAA just put in a new rule on it that the more people can be on the court. And I think it's a great rule. It's going to help older people, like me, because you don't have to have recruiting responsibilities. And, if I went out now, it was when I was with Penny and go out and recruit, say, hey, this is my assistant, Larry Brown. The only way they'd know anything about me is if they Google me up. A lot of them, recognize me because of my relationship with Allen Iverson, which I cherish. Even though I tease Allen every time I see him. My hair is white because of the 5 years we spent together. But it's important, I think, that older people, explain things that they've done, that they think they can make young coaches better. And then it's a great thing for young coaches, to have more young coaches on the court actually teaching. Because by the young coaches getting better, the kids are going to get better. And that's a really valuable thing for kids to be exposed to really great coaches that care about them, that want to make them better, and that make them understand honor. That you don't get better just by showing up. The harder you work, the luckier you get. And I remember I was working at Nike 100 camp, the best 100, and Kobe Bryant happened to be there. And a lot of the kids were asked if they wanted to watch Kobe work out. And, a bunch of them were excited. They said, all right, be in the lobby at 4:45. And they thought it was in the afternoon. And,
dedication.
Kobe used to say, kids today, they're going to practice 1.5 hours, maybe 2 hours twice a week. I'm going to work out 3 times a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And in 5 years, think about who's going to be better.
Absolutely.
And it's the truth. And you look at some of these great players in the NBA and in college, it's not an accident. They were lucky enough to be with some parents or teachers or coaches that really cared. And they had this work ethic that realized, the harder I work, the chances of me being successful are going to be there. And if I'm not, if I don't get to the level I had hoped for, I'm still going to be better off. The worst thing, what's that saying? If winning pays a really big price, wait till you get the bill for regret. Is that something like that?
Exactly.
I think that's pretty amazing.
Do you feel like you make more of an impact coaching in college or in the pros, or does it really matter? It's just you're teaching people.
No, it really doesn't matter because now, um, you look at the NBA now, Honor, there's so many young kids that, is in college. And now with COVID, you got 24, 25. Even there was a kid at Memphis that turned 26. Now he had a reason for being older. He had to work a couple of years and had some difficult issues. But a lot of college teams are as old as
Yeah.
NBA teams. We look at LeBron; he's 38, but there's a lot of really young kids that are playing in the NBA. So the impact is really um, how you do as a coach. You
Mhm.
know, do you get them to play the right way? Do you get them to act the right way? Do you get them to reach their potential?
Mhm.
Um, all those things really, really matter. And then the coaches that sit next to you. The greatest gift I could give any of the coaches that work with me was to be able to do what I did,
Mhm.
to be a head coach like John did, like hopefully he does again.
Yeah.
You know, that's it's pretty darn special. The other night, which amazing, I went to see Myers Park High School play, and George Lynch, who played for me, and Nazir Mohammed played for me. Their sons both play for Myers Park, and they're in the state championship. And Kevin Durant sat next to me. He just
Oh,
came to the game. They were, he's with Phoenix now. They played Charlotte last night. On a day off, he came to a high school game with Nazir, sat next to me, and it was like one, I admire the hell out of him. He's as fine a player as I've ever seen. But sitting next to him, he's a better person. He
wow.
came to the game because he loves the game and loves the kids.
Mhm.
And to sit next to him and talk to him, it blew me away. How
Wow.
lucky am I?
That's great. That's awesome. Wow. And it's just neat to see the people you impacted and their kids now, and then they're playing. And it makes us realize how old we're getting, but at the same time,
Yeah,
we're very,
I'm gonna forget that part, that
but
old
we're
part.
very blessed. So, well, you've already started building this incredible legacy. What do you hope that when people see you, that people say about you? What would you hope that they would say about you?
Well, people psychoanalyze me on her all the time. Why did you move so many times and this and that? Not, I don't have an answer for that. Um, you know, if I had my druthers, I would have loved to have been like Coach Smith and stayed in one place for 35, 40 years because I know kids kept coming back to see him to Chapel Hill. And then their families came back, and then their young kids came back. Even some young kids ended up playing, at Carolina. And that was something, if I look back on it, wow, what kind of legacy would that be if I'd have been fortunate enough to stay in one place? You know, I'll tell you another silly story. One day he asked me, where do you want to coach someday? This is right after I turned down the Connecticut job. And I said, well, I'd love to coach Carolina and be the head coach someday, but I don't want to see you leave. I mean, that would be the worst. He said, well, where would you think about it? And I said, well, Princeton, Northwestern, Vanderbilt, or Stanford. He said, why those schools? I said, well, you're probably going to get kids that are coming there for the right reasons. They're going to be great students, and they all have terrific histories, in terms of basketball and playing great conferences. And when I was 70, Honor, Bob Bowlesby, who was the athletic director at Stanford offered me the job, and I turned it down. My kids were in, one was in junior high and one was, just getting ready in high school. And I just said no. And how dumb was I?
Well,
Because
it's funny because when you say things, I'll never do this, and John and I said we'll never live apart ever. We're going to keep the family together, and then you have kids, and they become a priority. And we weren't going to move our kids to Oregon their senior year in high school, and John's out at Oregon State, and I stayed in Tampa, and we just are like, we'll make it work because it's what you felt like was right, and so. But yeah, but that wasn't a lifelong dream like what you so I don't know. I don't know what my husband would have done with that one.
yeah, but what you asked me about what I would like people to think about me is that, I cared about the people I coached and the people I've come in contact with, and I did the best I could. I'm, again, people talk about, some of the schools I was involved with got in some trouble. UCLA got in some trouble, but a lot of people, when I left, thought that I was the one that got them in trouble. There were things that happened long before I got there. I went to SMU, something happened. One of my assistants did something that he regretted. We got in trouble, and they had head coach's responsibility. So I hear people talk about me being evil, and then I hear people about, well, you could never stay in one place and people got tired of them. Those are just people that don't know me.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't matter. The people that are with you know what you're about. And that's the only thing that really, really matters. And did you do the very best you could every single day? And that's what I try to do. You know, I think I might have told you, John McClendon, was one of the first Black students to go to KU. He was assistant Olympic coach with
Mhm.
me and, coached all the historical Black colleges. He offered me my first coaching job. He learned under James Naismith, who invented the game, who was the first coach at Kansas. So my life goes all the way back to the beginning of the game. And I got stories all the way through, with Olympics and college, pro, ABA, high school, So that's what I want to share with people.
Did you have superstitions or like rituals that you did? Because didn't you wear a new tie? Did you continue doing that when you left the Spurs? Because I remember it with the Spurs.
That was something I've always been serious about. Um, I Paisley ties, and if we lost, but being in the, you could have a great year and you're going to lose 30 games. That's a lot of ties. So I got dispensation on that one. But I remember a silly story on her. John Calipari, when he worked for me, I inherited him when I went to Kansas. He worked for me at Kansas, and then when he lost the job in the NBA at New Jersey, I brought him to Philly with me. But I remember when he was, at Kansas, we went to Columbus to play Ohio State, and he was from Pittsburgh, and that was the closest, we were going to get to Pittsburgh. So he had family coming to Columbus, and he brought a brand new suit, and we lost. And I said, John, you can never wear that suit again. And GAs weren't making a lot of money at that time, and he was crushed. But I gave him dispensation. I said, no, you can, but why don't you pick out a game that we're going to win when next time you wear that suit?
That is great. Yeah,
But
I remember
I,
that.
I had a lot of silly superstitions, to be honest with you. But the tie one was one that was real serious with me. And Paisley, You know what? The Paisley tie, when I was a freshman, on the freshman team in high school, I was a seventh grader and made the team. I was so small, so skinny, and they didn't have any shorts to fit me. And my mom, I had a Paisley bathing suit, and I wore that as my shorts. And our colors were blue and white, and the bathing suit was some ugly green. So I think that might have affected my Paisley tie superstition.
Oh, that's so great. And so, but you did that all the way through your
Oh
entire
yeah,
coaching career? Okay. That's a
yeah,
lot of ties. So
yeah.
I want you to count up all your ties and all your moves.
No, when
That might be in the Guinness Book of World Records. I really honestly think could be.
yeah, well, I think at one time I coached more games than anybody probably ever. You know, with my freshman team and USA teams and ABA, college, NBA. I think I probably coached more, probably lost more games than anybody also.
Yeah. Well, listen, if you're making it to 106, you got a lot more coaching to do or consulting to do. But Coach, I'd love to end each podcast with the same question for each guest. This podcast is called the Honor It All podcast. So what are you choosing to honor today?
Well, I always say people say how you doing? I'm saying I'm above the grass, but um, I'd like to think about those people in East Palestine, Ohio, and hope that some way, somehow, our country feels a need to go in and help some of those people that, because there's tragedies all over, and I think sometimes we get caught up in trying to think about things that really don't matter. But I'd like to honor them, and then I'd also like to figure out a way that our society be a lot like a locker room, like we talked about earlier. Can you play, and are you decent?
Right.
That'd be pretty neat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's a perfect way to complete this episode with Coach Larry Brown. Thank you, Coach. And until next time, everyone, remember, we're not promised tomorrow, so be present today. It's a gift, and take time to honor it all. Thank you, Coach.
Thanks, Honor.